Hello and welcome to Witness Aid UK. Today I'm going to tell you about an incident that changed my life forever. It involves a prayer and a massive coincidence, something which I've only recently come to terms with in the last few months. I'm going to show you something precious to me. It's my Merchant Navy seaman's passport. It has absolutely no value, of course, but I have had that for 45 years. Clearly, it means something to me. At the age of 15 and a half, I left school in Stranraer, and I worked for 6 months on a building site, which was a completely unsuitable job for me, because I was built like a stick. But this was a job in conformity with the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses, because at that time in 1967 they were particularly speaking out against further education and career advancement, because Armageddon, the end of the world, was coming soon, imminently. Not within years, but within a matter of months. This is well documented in the literature at the time. So after a short period of unemployment, I had a job in Thomas Lipton's in George Street, Stranraer, and I worked there for 6 months until I finally persuaded my mother to allow me to go to the National Sea Training School in Gravesend in Kent. After seeing training films at school, I wanted to join the Merchant Navy, and I thought I would like to be a radio officer. But when I discovered it would take 2 years of study at college to do that, I was put off. Because with the imminence of the end of the world any time now, I thought to myself, if I go to college for 2 years, I might not get time to go to sea, and I really want to see the world. I want to travel. Also, I think at the back of my mind, I wanted to get away from home and possibly even get away from the Watchtower and its influence, although I wasn't really aware of that at the time. So finally, in August 1968, at the age of 16, I headed down to Gravesend in Kent, and I did a 6-week course as a catering boy. Working in catering at sea had a clear promotion structure. At the age of 18, I would qualify as an assistant steward. Then, if I wanted promotion after that, I could work my way up through assistant cook, second cook, chief cook, second steward, and finally chief steward. And as a chief steward, I would be responsible for all of the catering on everything from small steamers right through to large passenger liners. And I reckoned that this would take me maybe 10 to 15 years. But certainly the opportunities were there if I wished.
Here I am at age 16 and a half, after graduating from a 6-week course at the National Sea Training School.
After completing the course in October 1968, I had to wait just 1 week before I got my first ship. Compared to some lads, I was very unlucky, because I've heard tales recently of sailors of 16 years old who went off on round-the-world voyages, or trips to the Far East, or trips around Australia and New Zealand, or South America, or the lakes of Canada. So my first ship was a 1-month trip from Greenock on the Clyde round to Newcastle for dry dock. My first ship was Resurgent, a Royal Fleet auxiliary ship which carried cargo to support the Royal Navy all over the world. We spent 3 weeks in the Clyde and in the Holy Loch unloading cargo and ammunition before taking the ship round the north of Scotland to Newcastle, where we paid off. My second ship was an ore carrier, the Clark Eden, and we did 2 trips from the Manchester Ship Canal to Liberia and Mauritania in West Africa. We returned on the 3rd of March 1969, and since I had only been at sea for 2 months, I decided that I would get another ship right away instead of going home and taking my leave. So I visited the Manchester shipping pool, hoping to find a passenger ship which would go to lovely and exotic places, or at least to find a cargo passenger ship which would be travelling through the Far East or Australia or South America. I was unlucky. On that particular day, the only ship requiring a catering boy was a BP tanker, the British Statesman, which was lying on the north side of the Thames at Tilbury. I wasn't terribly keen to take it, but the experienced sailor who was with me persuaded me to take it because he said, "It will only be for 6 months, and there'll be a lot of overtime on a ship like that." Well, that evening, after having a medical, I took my travel warrant and travelled from Manchester down to London Euston Station, and there I was met by 2 agents of the British Shipping Federation who took me in a very fast car down to Tilbury. We sailed the next morning down the Thames, heading for the Persian Gulf. This was on the 4th of March 1969. Now, just a couple of years earlier, there had been a 6-day war between Israel and Egypt. As a result of that, several ships had been sunk in the Suez Canal, and it was still blocked. That meant that the short route to the Far East and India was closed. So all shipping heading for the Far East would have to go round South Africa, and that would take a month. In all, we made 3 trips to the Persian Gulf, first to Kuwait, and then the next 2 times we went to Karg Island in Iran, where we picked up cargoes of crude oil. The first cargo we took to Australia, to Fremantle, and I was able to go ashore just for a very short time, into Fremantle. And the following day I managed to go to Perth, the capital of Western Australia, just for about 1 hour. But it was quite an adventure for a young lad. The second interesting place we visited was Portland, Maine, in USA. Again, I was only ashore for about 7 or 8 hours. I remember seeing Longfellow's house, and I did a bit of shopping, and I think I went to a cafe and had a trip in a yellow cab, and that was pretty much it. But it was still an exciting and interesting thing to do at that age. On the 3rd trip back from the Gulf, we were heading for Europe, and we were expecting to go to Rotterdam before paying off at Falmouth in the southwest of England. Now, as I've told you before, I had been raised in the Jehovah's Witness religion since the age of 4. And although I wasn't yet baptized, the teachings of that religion were deeply indoctrinated in me. My mother was sending me Watchtower and Awake magazines on subscription. The Watchtower was boring then, and it's not much better now, and I don't think I really read it very much. But the Awake magazine was more of a digest or journal, and I probably read that because I didn't have much reading material on the ship. Now, at that time in the Awake magazine, in the late 60s, there were many articles directed at young people, directing them not to a career, not to a life at university or for personal advancement, but encourage them to give up those things and make a career in the Watchtower, going from door to door, preaching the Watchtower message, because the end of the world was coming very soon. Armageddon was imminent. We had already been told at this stage that 1975 was the date for Armageddon. That's how close it was. Interestingly enough, during my 7 months at sea, since the 3rd of March 1969, I hadn't been to any meetings. I always had good intentions of going to meetings when I went to port, but for some strange reason, I never got around to it. This was partly because I wasn't ashore long enough. But even when I was in Manchester for 2 or 3 nights, in March and April, I had no desire to go to the meetings. But after 7 months at sea, this began to weigh upon my conscience, and I felt very guilty about the fact that I hadn't been to meetings all of that time. The importance of going to the Kingdom Hall is a key Jehovah's Witness teaching, and I hadn't been doing it. So, as we approached Antwerp, I said a prayer to Jehovah. And in my earnestness and sincerity, I asked God to direct me to the Kingdom Hall in Antwerp. Now, I must confess, this was probably quite a half-hearted prayer, because I didn't really want to do it. I think it was really done out of a sense of duty and a sense of belief that it was the right thing to do. As we sailed up the English Channel, it was a Saturday, and I realised that we weren't going to arrive in port until sometime on Sunday. That meant I wouldn't be able to go ashore and attend the Sunday meeting, and I think I felt a slight sense of relief. But nevertheless, I was praying and saying, I'd like to go to the Tuesday meeting, which is a book study held in a private home. However, I realised that the likelihood of finding a private home where the Watchtower meeting on a Tuesday night would be held was fairly unlikely. Well, anyway, we docked on Monday night. Now, just to take you back a couple of months, when we arrived in Australia, the second steward had jumped ship. He went ashore and he didn't come back. That meant we were 1 steward short. And since I was the oldest of 2 catering boys, I was given temporary promotion to assistant steward. And I was receiving a man's wages for 4 months. This meant that I was earning not £24 a month, but £52 a month, which is a considerable increase in wages. Along with the increased wages came increased responsibility, and one of my duties as an assistant steward was to serve breakfast in the mess for the crew. Those who were going on watch 8 till 12 would have their breakfast at about 7:30 in the morning, and those who were coming off watch from 4 till 8 would have their breakfast around 8:15 each day. Well, on this Tuesday morning, I finished serving breakfast and I was tidying up, and I saw that the night watchman who came from ashore was sitting in the canteen. Now, on an oil tanker, there's always a risk of fire and explosion, so it's important to have a night watchman just to keep an eye on things when you're in port, and to make sure that no one smokes cigarettes in forbidden places. Well, I went up to the night watchman and I said to him, "Do you speak English?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Have you ever heard of Jehovah's Witnesses? Do you know if there is a Kingdom Hall in Antwerp?" And he looked at me and said, "I am a Jehovah's Witness. The meeting is in my house tonight." Well, if you're surprised, can you imagine how I felt at the age of 17? Anyway, we had a chat and it was decided that I would meet him that evening and he would take me to the Tuesday night book study meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses. And when we arrived, there were about 10 or 12 people there, which is a typical number for a small home book study. As you might expect, they were quite pleased to see me, and they encouraged me to give up my career at sea because of all the meetings I was missing. They had just been attending a large convention of Jehovah's Witnesses in Belgium, and they were full of the message of Armageddon coming soon. And they persuaded me as much as they could to give up my career, leave the Merchant Navy, and come closer to Jehovah. Well, the next day we sailed for Falmouth in the southwest of England. And on Friday morning, the 29th of August 1969, we paid off. This is my payslip for the British Statesman. And when I look at my top line wage, in 6 months I had earned £445, 19 shillings and 8 pence. I had sent home £100 to my mother, and after various deductions and taxes I was left with a cash payment of £204, 13 shillings and 1 penny. That was a handsome payoff for a boy of 17 and a half. To let you understand the value of £445 in 1969, I can tell you that the cost of a brand new Austin Mini car at that time was approximately £550. So it was a considerable amount of money to receive for 6 months. I also had the prospect of getting permanent promotion to assistant steward in just a few months' time when I would be 18. Well, I took the night train up to London on the Friday, and the very first thing I did on the Saturday was to find a camera shop, and there I bought my very first SLR camera, a Praktica Nova 1B. I think it cost me £58, and I was very proud of it and very pleased to own such a lovely camera with such a good lens. I spent the day looking round the centre of London, photographing Downing Street, St Paul's, Piccadilly, Buckingham Palace and various other famous places. Then I took the night train from London up to Stranraer, back to my home where my mother and sister lived. Now, I'm not quite sure at exactly what point I decided to leave the Merchant Navy, but I know that there were some very strong influences upon me to persuade me to do that. And I'm pretty sure that in the month of September I would have attended a local convention of Jehovah's Witnesses where roughly 1,000 people would be in attendance. That would either be in Glasgow or Edinburgh. And of course, Meeting all the Jehovah's Witnesses that I knew at that time, what do you think they said to me? This is the wrong time to be leaving Jehovah. This is the wrong time to be missing meetings. This is the time to draw close to Jehovah. Leave the Merchant Navy. Come back to the meetings and be a faithful, loyal Jehovah's Witness. Get baptized, because Armageddon's coming soon. And if you're not baptized, you won't be saved. This is the kind of stuff that I was getting. I was also being love-bombed, of course. That's where people show you extraordinary affection and pretend to be very friendly. But what they're really doing is simply trying to persuade you to conform to their point of view. At that time, the assemblies had 4 main points. Remember, this was the days of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. So the first thing they used to tell us at the assemblies was, don't have long hair. Girls, don't have miniskirts. Don't take drugs and don't fornicate. And the 4th thing, don't get a career. Don't look for worldly education and advancement, because Armageddon is coming soon. So all of this was working upon me. And I remember one adult witness told me that my mother was very worried about me while I was at sea. So finally I decided not to return to sea, and instead I went back to Edinburgh, where we had come from.
These are the 3 entries for the ships I was on during the year that I was in the Merchant Navy. You can see the first one, RFA Resurgent, the second, MV Clark Eden, and the third and final ship, SS British Statesman. There are actually 60 entries in this book, but 57 of them are blank. Only 3 were used in my very short career.
I found a job quite easily as a waiter in a restaurant in Shandwick Place at the west end of Edinburgh. And I found a bedsitter and lived there alone. But that wasn't good enough for the witnesses. My work as a waiter in Shandwick Place at the west end of Edinburgh entailed working evenings. It was a restaurant after all. So on a Tuesday and Thursday I couldn't manage to go to the meetings, although I attended the Sunday meetings regularly. I can't say that this was a pleasure. It was really a duty. It was done out of conformity and guilt, to please Jehovah. At the end of 6 months, I gave up my work as a waiter so that I could attend more meetings. I got a job in a bacon factory as a labourer, processing ham. It was a Scottish Cooperative Wholesale Society in Leith. And it was basically 5 day shifts, working from 7 or 8 in the morning until 4 or 5 in the afternoon. This allowed me to attend meetings. And during that time, I was baptized at the age of 18. But that wasn't good enough. Now I had to go out pioneering, spending 100 hours unpaid time going from door to door, preaching the message of the Watchtower and the imminence of Armageddon coming soon. There was a campaign at that time with a book called The Truth That Leads to Eternal Life, and I'm sure that that campaign had a great effect on me also, because there was a very clever marketing and advertising campaign with it. It was a Bible study course of 6 months. And the idea was that instead of taking years for people to have Bible studies and get baptized as Jehovah's Witnesses, as had happened in the past, now, because the time was so short, Bible studies would only last 6 months. If at the end of that time, the interested person had not made steps towards baptism, the Bible study would be stopped, and we would move on to someone who was really interested in getting eternal life in the paradise earth soon. So, I gave up my job in the bacon factory, and I started a window cleaning round, and I spent 100 hours a month going from door to door preaching the kingdom of Jehovah's Witnesses. My life had already gone right down the toilet by this stage, but little did I know that I had another 28 years of depression, poverty and misery within the Watchtower cult. Now, since I got out of the Watchtower and I finally had a run-in with the elders in 1998, which you can see on my Leaving Jehovah's Witnesses videos, numbers 1 and 2, I have been deeply troubled by that incident on the ship in 1969. I just couldn't work out how a loving God could have dropped me in the shit of the Watchtower cult for 28 years. What on earth was he thinking about? What was the sense of that? What was the purpose of that? To do that to me? What lesson could I possibly learn from being in a cult for most of my adult life? Then I began to say, I wonder if someone else heard my prayer. Maybe Satan, maybe the devil heard my prayer, and he was up to mischief and thought, that's a good way to divert someone away from the worship of Jesus Christ. We'll put him into a cult that doesn't really honour Jesus Christ. I just couldn't work it out. And at various times I cursed God and I cursed Satan, and I just couldn't work it out. Well, a few weeks ago I spoke to my friend about this, and he was familiar with the story, which I told him again. And he said, you know what? The answer to your prayer? No one heard that prayer. What happened to you that day in August 1969 was a coincidence. Nothing more and nothing less. And we thought about it and discussed it for some time. And I realised that he was right. And it brought me some comfort. A few weeks ago, I found a couple of very interesting books in the library, and I'd like to recommend them to you, especially if you're interested in mathematics or probability or chance. The first book is called The Improbability Principle. It's written by David Hand. The second book is written by Leonard Milodinoff, and it's called The Drunkard's Walk. Both of those books discuss probability and chance, and more importantly, improbability. and the effect that mathematics has on our lives. An extraordinary effect that we often don't realise. For example, you would expect, if you toss a coin, to have a result of 50% heads and 50% tails, particularly if you were to toss the coin 10,000 times. But you know what? Sometimes when you toss a coin, it will come up heads 10, 20 times in a row. It can happen. It does happen. It seems to defy the laws of probability, the 50% law in this case. And then at other times, there may be a run of tails for 10 or 15 or 20 times. In those two books, each author relates accounts of people who have won the lottery twice, using the same numbers within a matter of weeks of each event. That is astounding, is it not? And you might think, with a chance of 14 million to 1, it's amazing to win the lottery once, but to win it twice, and with the same numbers, that just seems impossible. But the fact is, when you think about it, there are many lotteries all over the world. Some of them are held every day. And over a period of a few years, there may be tens of thousands of lotteries, maybe more. So maybe it shouldn't be surprising when occasionally the highly improbable occurs. There's another very important principle in David Hand's book, and that is the nearly principle. And he points out that sometimes when highly improbable things occur, they don't happen in an identical fashion. For example, in that case of the lottery numbers, one man won the lottery twice with the same numbers, but he didn't win the jackpot twice. The 6 numbers in each case came up in slightly different configurations. So although the man won a considerable amount of money on each occasion, it was not a 6 out of 6 configuration. It was a choice of 5 numbers out of 6 on each occasion. And if you do your maths, you'll see how the numbers help to allow that to happen, even though it seems highly improbable. Now, another important feature of the nearly principle applies in my case to my prayer. If you recall, I said a prayer to God about going to the meeting before I arrived in Antwerp. But in fact, because of the guilt that was instilled in me as a child, I used to say that prayer every time we went to port. I'm sure I did say it more than once, because I was consumed with guilt, having been brought up in a cult. Now, on all the other occasions, there was no one there on shoreside to persuade me to go to a meeting. But on this one particular occasion, I had an unlucky coincidence. Out of all the ships in that huge port, there just happened to be a Jehovah's Witness night watchman on that particular one, on that particular day. And if I hadn't been interested in Jehovah's Witnesses, I would never have known that that man was a witness. And we would never have had a conversation. So, when you pray for things, and you pray for them often or all the time, eventually, if there is a coincidence, you might think your prayer has been answered. But in fact, if you look at all the number of times that you've actually said the prayer, it hasn't been answered at all. It's rather like the survivors after a disaster. Many people will come forward and say, I thank God for answering my prayer to save me. But what about all the people who died in the disaster? Were they not praying? You bet they were. But their prayer wasn't answered for some strange reason. Once again, random chance, unforeseen circumstance can affect our lives in a very profound way. Finally, I would like to talk to you young people who are watching this video, especially if you are Jehovah's Witnesses or being raised as Jehovah's Witnesses. Try to learn from my experience and what has happened to me. When I look back on my life, I have to look back with disappointment and hurt, because my life went down the toilet at the age of 17. Please, don't let the same thing happen to you. But some of you will be sitting there saying, but I love Jehovah. I want to be in the paradise. I want to be a Jehovah's Witness and please my parents and my friends at the Kingdom Hall. Well, if that's the case, let me ask you, why are you looking at opposing points of view? Maybe, like me at the age of 16, you are having some doubts about the certainty of the Jehovah's Witness religion. The difference is that I couldn't voice my opinions. I couldn't put into words the doubts that I had because I didn't have information to help me to get out of the religion. The only thing I could do was run away to sea. However, I had been so deeply indoctrinated by that stage that I was persuaded to return. You, on the other hand, have the privilege of knowledge. You've got information, you've got videos like this one, you've got the whole internet to look at. And I would encourage you to go away after you've watched this video and look at a couple of websites which are very good, very helpful. jwfacts.com and jwsurvey.org. They are very similar to the website I had in the late 1990s. They will inform you about the false doctrines of Jehovah's Witnesses, the rewritten history, and the cruel and sometimes stupid policies regarding blood transfusions and disfellowshipping people and shunning them. These are all things that you need to find out about so that you can make a decision now to change your life for the better. And let me tell you this, if you go away having had a chance to look in the mirror right now, one day you will be my age, and I promise you, I guarantee that this video will come back to haunt you in about 40 or 50 years' time. You will wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning asking what happened to your life, wondering why it went down the toilet, wondering why you've had no fulfillment or purpose or career or meaningful activity or pleasure in your life because you've been serving the Watchtower organization and following the lead of a deceitful, lying governing body, which is the head of a publishing company worldwide. making millions and millions of dollars. So please, get a life. Find happiness. I hope you do. Thanks for listening.